A king's quest that echoes through eternity in the dust-covered ruins of ancient Nineveh, buried beneath 4 millennia of sand and silence. Archaeologists uncovered humanity's first great story, a tale so powerful it would redefine our understanding of literature, friendship, mortality, and what it means to be human. Carved into 12 clay tablets in cuneiform script, the Epic of Gilgamesh emerged from the earth like a voice from humanity's childhood, speaking truths that still resonate in every modern heart that has ever loved, lost, and searched for meaning in an indifferent universe. This is not just the story of a king who lived over 4,000 years ago in ancient Mesopotamia. This is the blueprint for every hero's journey that followed, the template for every buddy movie ever made, and the first recorded human wrestling with the ultimate questions. What does it mean to live? What does it mean to die? And what, if anything, survives when we're gone? Long before Odysseus sailed the wine-dark sea, before Achilles raged at the walls of Troy, before Moses parted the Red Sea, or Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree, there was Gilgamesh, king, hero, tyrant, and ultimately the first character in literature to discover that true immortality lies not in avoiding death, but in the stories we leave behind and the love we share while we're here. The historical Gilgamesh was likely a real king who ruled the Sumerian city-state of Uruk around 2700 BCE, making him one of the earliest historical figures to transition from history into legend. Archaeological evidence suggests that a king named Gilgamesh did indeed rule Uruk, and the Sumerian king list records him as the 5th king of Uruk's first dynasty, crediting him with a reign of 126 years, clearly already stepping into the realm of myth. The historical Uruk was one of the world's first true cities, a massive urban center that may have housed up to 80,000 people at its peak. Located in what is now southern Iraq, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Uruk was a marvel of ancient engineering and urban planning. The city was surrounded by massive walls that the epic attributes to Gilgamesh himself, and contained temples, palaces, administrative buildings, and residential districts that represented the pinnacle of Bronze Age civilization. But history has a way of becoming legend, and legend has a way of becoming literature. Over the centuries following his death, stories about Gilgamesh grew in the telling. He became not just a king, but a superhuman hero. His deeds became not just impressive, but miraculous. His story became not just entertaining, but profound, a vehicle for exploring the deepest questions of human existence. The evolution of the Epic of Gilgamesh as we know it today is actually a compilation of stories that developed over more than a millennium. The earliest Sumerian poems about Gilgamesh date to around 2100 BCE, nearly 600 years after the historical king's death. These early poems were separate stories: Gilgamesh and Enkidu, Gilgamesh and the Bull of Heaven, the death of Enkidu, and others. The genius of later scribes, particularly Sinleki-Unini, an Akkadian priest and scholar who lived around 1300–1000 BCE, was to weave these disparate tales into a single coherent narrative that transformed episodic adventures into a profound meditation on friendship, mortality, and the human condition. Sinleki-Unini is often credited as the world's first known author, the first person to take existing stories and reshape them into a unified literary work with themes, character development, and emotional depth. The version of the epic that survived to the modern day was found primarily in the library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, dating to the 7th century BCE. When British archaeologist Austen Henry Layard and his assistant Hormuzd Rassam excavated the site in the 1840s and 1850s, they uncovered over 30,000 clay tablets and fragments. Among them were the 12 tablets containing the most complete version of Gilgamesh's story, a literary treasure that had been waiting in the darkness for over 2 millennia. The discovery that changed everything. The modern rediscovery of Gilgamesh reads like an adventure story itself. George Smith, a young British Assyriologist working in the British Museum, was examining the tablets from Nineveh when he came across a passage that made him leap from his chair. It was December 3rd, 1872, and Smith had just read an account of a great flood that bore striking similarities to the biblical story of Noah's Ark. Smith's excitement was so great that, according to witnesses, he began dancing around the room, shouting that he had discovered an account of the flood. His discovery made international headlines and launched a new era of interest in ancient Mesopotamian literature. The implications were staggering. Here was a flood narrative that predated the biblical account by over a millennium, suggesting that the story of a great deluge was part of a much older tradition of Middle Eastern storytelling. But the flood, story dramatic as it was, represented only one tablet of the 12-tablet epic. As scholars worked to translate and understand the complete work, they realized they had uncovered something far more significant than a parallel to biblical narrative. They had found humanity's first great work of literature, a complex, sophisticated narrative that explored themes of friendship, mortality, the abuse of power, the relationship between civilization and nature, and the search for meaning in a universe that seemed indifferent to human suffering. The hero king of Uruk, Gilgamesh the tyrant. The epic opens with a portrait of Gilgamesh that subverts our expectations of a heroic king. This is not a wise and beloved ruler, but a tyrant whose subjects suffer under his oppressive reign. The text presents him as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, a unique heritage that grants him superhuman strength and beauty, but also seems to fuel his arrogance and cruel disregard for his people's well-being. Surpassing all other kings, heroic in stature, brave scion of Uruk, wild bull on the rampage. The epic begins, establishing Gilgamesh as larger than life. But this praise quickly turns to criticism. Gilgamesh leaves no son to his father. His lust leaves no virgin to her lover, neither the warrior's daughter nor the wife of the noble. The people of Uruk cry out to the gods for relief from their oppressive king. Their complaint reveals the extent of Gilgamesh's tyranny. He claims the right of first night with every bride. He forces the young men of the city into grueling labor, projects, and he shows no respect for the established order of society. His divine strength makes him invincible in combat, his royal position makes him untouchable legally, and his arrogance makes him deaf to the suffering of his subjects. This opening presents us with a fascinating paradox. Gilgamesh is simultaneously the hero of the epic and its initial antagonist. He is the character we're meant to follow and sympathize with, yet he begins the story as someone clearly deserving of punishment. This moral complexity makes Gilgamesh one of literature's first truly three-dimensional characters, neither purely good nor entirely evil, but deeply human in his contradictions. The divine response. The gods hear the cries of Uruk's people and decide to act, but their solution is characteristically indirect and complex. Rather than simply punishing Gilgamesh or removing him from power, they choose to create a companion for him, someone who can match his strength and challenge his behavior. This decision reveals the gods' understanding that Gilgamesh's cruelty stems not from evil intent, but from isolation and the corruption that comes from unchecked power. Aruru, the goddess of creation, fashions Enkidu from clay and divine essence, much as humans were originally created in Mesopotamian mythology. But while humans were created to serve the gods, Enkidu is created specifically to contend with Gilgamesh. He is described as Gilgamesh's equal in strength and stature, but his opposite in almost every other way. Where Gilgamesh represents civilization, Enkidu embodies the natural world. Where Gilgamesh is cultured and sophisticated, albeit cruelly so, Enkidu is innocent and wild. Where Gilgamesh rules over others through force and authority, Enkidu lives in harmony with the animals of the wilderness. This contrast sets up one, of the epic's central themes: the tension between civilization and nature, culture and wilderness, human society and the natural order. Enkidu, the wild man. Born of clay and stars, Enkidu's creation represents one of literature's most powerful origin stories for a character. Formed from clay by the goddess Aruru, he springs into existence not as a helpless infant, but as a fully grown adult with the strength to match Gilgamesh. Yet despite his physical maturity, he possesses the innocence of a newborn, knowing nothing of human society, culture, or the complex web of relationships that define civilized life. The epic describes Enkidu's first state in terms that emphasize his connection to the natural world. Shaggy with hair is his whole body. He is endowed with head hair like a woman. His locks billow in profusion like Ashnan. He knows neither people nor settled living, but with the gazelles he feeds on grass. This description establishes Enkidu as humanity's link to its pre-civilized state, representing what humans might have been before they developed agriculture, cities, laws, and the complex social structures that define civilization. He is not primitive in a pejorative sense, but rather represents an alternative way of being human, one that exists in harmony with nature rather than in dominion over it. The innocent. Among beasts, Enkidu's life among the wild animals presents a paradise of sorts, a state of innocence and natural harmony that recalls the Garden of Eden story or the Golden Age myths found in many cultures. He drinks at the same watering holes as the gazelles, runs with the herds across the steppes, and protects the wild animals from human hunters by filling in their pits and destroying their traps. This protection of animals from human predation is significant as it establishes Enkidu as a guardian of the natural world against human encroachment. He represents a moral sensibility that values all life, not just human life. A perspective that contrasts sharply with Gilgamesh's callous disregard even for human suffering. But Enkidu's interference with human hunting activities inevitably brings him into conflict with civilization. A trapper discovers that someone has been sabotaging his work and tracks the mysterious figure who runs with the wild herds. When he sees Enkidu, the trapper is terrified not just by his wild appearance, but by his obvious strength and the way the animals seem to obey him. The temptation and fall, the trapper reports to Gilgamesh about the wild man who threatens human activities in the wilderness. Gilgamesh's solution is both pragmatic and symbolic. He sends Shamhat, a temple prostitute, to seduce Enkidu and thereby separate him from his animal companions. This plan reveals Gilgamesh's sophisticated understanding of human nature. He recognizes that sexual awakening and the loss of innocence will transform Enkidu from a creature of nature into a being capable of joining human society. The seduction, seen as one of the most psychologically complex and symbolically rich passages in ancient literature. Shamhat waits by the watering hole where Enkidu comes with the wild herds. When she reveals herself, Enkidu is instantly attracted, having no cultural conditioning to resist or complicate his natural desires. They make love for 6 days and 7 nights, and when it's over, Enkidu discovers that he has been fundamentally changed. When he turned back to his wild beasts, the gazelles saw Enkidu and darted off. The wild animals distanced themselves from his body. The animals can sense that Enkidu is no longer one of them. He has crossed an invisible boundary between nature and culture, innocence and experience, animal and human existence. Like Adam and Eve after eating from the tree of knowledge, he has gained awareness but lost paradise. But Shamhat is not merely an agent of corruption. She serves as Enkidu's guide into human culture, teaching him to eat bread instead of grass, to drink beer instead of water from streams, and to wear clothing instead of living naked. She represents the positive aspects of civilization, culture, knowledge, social connection, even as her seduction of Enkidu represents the loss of natural innocence. The meeting of titans. Enkidu's journey to civilization. After his transformation, Enkidu's journey to Uruk becomes a journey through the stages of human cultural development. First, he learns the basics of human survival, eating cooked food, drinking fermented beverages, wearing clothes, and using tools and weapons. Then he learns social roles and responsibilities. He becomes a shepherd, protecting domestic animals from the same wild beasts he once counted as companions. This progression from wild man to shepherd to city dweller mirrors humanity's own evolution, from hunter-gatherer societies through pastoralism to urban civilization. Enkidu's rapid transformation compresses millennia of human cultural development into a single narrative arc, making him a symbol of humanity's journey from nature to culture. As Enkidu approaches Uruk, he hears stories about Gilgamesh's oppressive rule, particularly his habit of sleeping with brides before their husbands can consummate their marriages. Enkidu's reaction is one of moral outrage. Having gained a sense of justice along with his cultural education, he declares that he will confront Gilgamesh and put an end to this tyranny. The confrontation, the meeting between Gilgamesh and Enkidu, occurs at a wedding ceremony where Gilgamesh is about to exercise his royal privilege of sleeping with the bride. Enkidu blocks the doorway, preventing the king from entering the marriage chamber. This confrontation is loaded with symbolic significance. Enkidu's first act in civilized society is to defend marriage, family, and social order against the arbitrary exercise of power. The epic describes their battle with cosmic imagery, as if the very foundations of the earth are shaking from the force of their conflict. They locked together like warriors, they shattered the doorpost and the wall shook. At the door of the marital chamber they wrestled. They struggled in the street in the public square, the doorpost was shattered, and the wall shook. This is not merely a physical contest, but a clash between two different ways of being human. Gilgamesh represents the corruption that can come with unchecked power and civilization's tendency toward hierarchy and oppression. Enkidu represents natural justice and the moral sensibility that comes from living in harmony with natural law rather than human law. The birth of friendship. The resolution of their conflict is as psychologically sophisticated as anything in modern literature. After battling to a standstill, neither able to defeat the other, Gilgamesh and Enkidu recognize each other's worthiness and strength. Instead of continuing to fight, they embrace and become friends. This transformation from antagonists to companions occurs because each has found in the other what he was missing. Gilgamesh finally has an equal, someone who can challenge him and serve as a check on his worst impulses. Enkidu has found someone who appreciates his strength and can serve as his guide in navigating the complexities of civilized life. Their friendship is presented as one of literature's first and greatest love stories. Not romantic love, but the profound bond between two people who complete each other. The epic describes their relationship in language that emphasizes its depth and exclusivity. They become closer than brothers, more devoted than lovers, more loyal than family members, bound by blood. Adventures in the Cedar Forest. The call to adventure. Once Gilgamesh and Enkidu have established their friendship, the king's character begins to change. The companionship and moral influence of Enkidu channel his tremendous energy and ambition toward more worthy goals than oppressing his subjects. But Gilgamesh remains restless and ambitious, seeking challenges worthy of his superhuman abilities. He proposes an expedition to the Cedar Forest to battle Humbaba, the monstrous guardian, appointed by the gods to protect the sacred cedars. This quest serves multiple purposes in the narrative. It provides an opportunity for heroic adventure. It addresses a practical need. Cedar wood was precious in treeless Mesopotamia, and it begins Gilgamesh's pattern of challenging divine authority. The Cedar Forest represents the boundary between the human world and the realm of the gods. The cedars themselves are sacred, and Humbaba is their divine protector. By proposing to invade this sacred space and kill its guardian, Gilgamesh is essentially declaring war on the natural and divine order. This hubris will have consequences that resonate throughout the rest of the epic. Enkidu initially opposes the expedition, having encountered Humbaba during his wild days and understanding the creature's terrifying power. His reluctance introduces one of the epic's recurring themes: the tension between prudent wisdom and heroic ambition. Should humans accept the limits placed on them by gods and nature, or should they strive to transcend those boundaries regardless of the consequences? Preparing for battle. The preparation for the Cedar Forest expedition reveals much about both characters and about Mesopotamian culture. Gilgamesh and Enkidu commission weapons from the finest smiths in Uruk, creating axes and swords of unprecedented size and sharpness. The physical preparation is matched by spiritual preparation, as they seek the blessings of the gods and consult with Gilgamesh's divine mother, Ninsun. Ninsun's response to her son's quest is one of the epic's most psychologically realistic moments. Like any mother, she fears for her child's safety and tries to dissuade him from danger. But she also recognizes his nature. He is two-thirds divine and cannot be satisfied with ordinary human limitations. Her blessing of the expedition, while reluctant, acknowledges that Gilgamesh must follow his destiny even if it leads to danger. The arming scene and the blessing scene establish patterns that will recur throughout Western literature. The hero must prepare both physically and spiritually for his quest. He must face opposition from those who love him and fear for his safety, and he must ultimately choose between safety and glory, between prudent limits and heroic transcendence. The journey through the wilderness. The journey to the Cedar Forest takes Gilgamesh and Enkidu through 3 weeks of wilderness travel, during which they experience prophetic dreams that provide insight into their destiny. These dream sequences are among the epic's most psychologically sophisticated passages, using symbolic imagery to explore the hero's fears and motivations. In one dream, Gilgamesh sees a mountain falling on him, which Enkidu interprets as a prophecy of their victory over Humbaba. In another, he dreams of a wild bull that attacks him, which again Enkidu interprets optimistically. These dream interpretations reveal Enkidu's role as not just Gilgamesh's companion, but his psychological guide, the voice of wisdom and understanding that helps the king navigate the symbolic landscape of his own psyche. The dreams also serve a literary function, building tension and anticipation for the confrontation to come. They suggest that the hero's quest has cosmic significance, that their actions will have consequences beyond their personal glory or failure. The encounter with Humbaba himself is one of literature's most memorable monsters, not simply a physical threat, but a psychological and spiritual challenge. He is described as having 7 layers of supernatural armor, a roar that can split mountains, and breath that brings death. More significantly, he represents the natural world's power to resist human encroachment and exploitation. The confrontation with Humbaba is not a simple battle between good and evil, but a complex moral situation. Humbaba was appointed by the gods to guard the Cedar Forest, making him a legitimate authority figure rather than a malevolent destroyer. His role is to preserve the sacred grove from human exploitation, making him, from one perspective, an environmental protector rather than a villain. When Gilgamesh and Enkidu arrive at the forest, they are awed by its beauty and majesty. The cedars stretch toward heaven, their canopy so dense that sunlight barely penetrates to the forest floor. This is clearly a sacred space, a natural cathedral that inspires reverence and wonder. The hero's decision to proceed with their plan, to cut down the trees and kill their guardian, marks a crucial moment in the epic's exploration of humanity's relationship with nature. The battle itself is fierce, but brief. Humbaba proves vulnerable when the sun god Shamash intervenes on the hero's behalf, sending 13 winds to bind the monster and make him helpless. This divine intervention raises questions about justice and fairness. Is the hero's victory legitimate if it required divine assistance against a creature who was simply fulfilling his appointed role? The moral complexity of victory after defeating Humbaba, Gilgamesh, and Enkidu face a crucial moral choice. The monster pleads for mercy, offering to serve as their guide through the forest and to provide them with all the cedar wood they desire. He appeals to Enkidu specifically, reminding him of their encounters during Enkidu's days in the wilderness and claiming kinship as fellow creatures of the wild. Enkidu's response is one of the epic's most morally troubling moments. He urges Gilgamesh to kill Humbaba immediately, arguing that showing mercy would be a sign of weakness and that the gods would be angry if they allowed their enemy to escape. This advice contradicts everything we might expect from Enkidu, who began the story as a protector of wild creatures and a voice of natural wisdom. The decision to kill the helpless Humbaba transforms the hero's victory from a triumph of courage into something more ambiguous, possibly a war crime, certainly a moral failure. The monster's death cry echoes through the cedar forest, and his curse upon his killers will have consequences that drive the rest of the epic's plot. This moral complexity elevates the Epic of Gilgamesh above simple adventure stories. The heroes achieve their goal and return to Uruk in triumph, laden with precious cedar wood and covered in glory. But their victory comes at a moral cost that will ultimately destroy their friendship and send Gilgamesh on a desperate quest for redemption and meaning. The wrath of the gods, Gilgamesh rejects. Ishtar following their triumphant return from the cedar forest, Gilgamesh's reputation as a hero reaches its peak. His fame spreads throughout Mesopotamia, and he becomes the object of divine attention. The goddess Ishtar, deity of love and war, proposes marriage to the hero king, offering him divine status and unlimited power as her consort. Ishtar's proposal should be seen as the ultimate honor, to be chosen by a goddess as her husband would elevate Gilgamesh to divine status and grant him immortality. Her offer includes magnificent gifts, a chariot of gold and lapis lazuli, a palace with magnificent rooms, and dominion over kings and princes. She promises that his enemies will bow before him and that his flocks and herds will multiply beyond counting. But Gilgamesh's response is one of the most shocking rejections in ancient literature. Rather than accepting with gratitude, he launches into a devastating critique of Ishtar's character, cataloging her history of destroying her lovers. He reminds her of Tammuz, the shepherd god whom she loved and then condemned to spend half the year in the underworld. He recalls her affair with the beautiful gardener Isulanu, whom she transformed into a frog when he rejected her advances. Which of your lovers did you ever love forever? Gilgamesh challenges. What bridegroom of yours has pleased you for all time? His rejection is not just personal, but philosophical. He recognizes that Ishtar represents the destructive aspect of divine love, the consuming passion that ultimately destroys rather than nurtures. This scene reveals Gilgamesh's psychological sophistication and his growing understanding of divine nature. Unlike his earlier reckless challenges to divine authority, his rejection of Ishtar shows wisdom and self-knowledge. He understands that accepting her offer would mean losing his essential humanity and becoming merely another victim of divine caprice. The bull of heaven, Ishtar's response to this rejection, reveals the vindictive side of divine nature. Enraged by Gilgamesh's insults, she demands that her father Anu create the bull of heaven to destroy Uruk and its insolent king. When Anu initially refuses, citing the destruction such a creature would cause, Ishtar threatens to break down the gates of the underworld and let the dead devour the living. Faced with this ultimate threat, Anu reluctantly agrees to create the bull of heaven, but he warns Ishtar that the creature will bring 7 years of famine to Uruk. Ishtar accepts this consequence, revealing her willingness to destroy innocent people to satisfy her wounded pride. The bull of heaven is a creature of pure destruction, breathing death from its nostrils and creating chasms in the earth with its hooves. Its first breath kills 100 young men of Uruk. Its second breath kills 200 more. and its third breath creates a pit so large that Enkidu falls into it. The monster represents natural disaster on a cosmic scale: earthquake, plague, and famine rolled into a single apocalyptic threat. The heroes united. The battle with the Bull of Heaven shows Gilgamesh and Enkidu's friendship at its most powerful. When Enkidu falls into the pit created by the bull's breath, Gilgamesh risks his own life to continue the battle alone. When Enkidu climbs out of the pit, he immediately rejoins the fight without thought for his own safety. Their coordination and mutual support allow them to defeat a creature that could have destroyed their entire city. The victory is achieved through cunning as well as courage. Enkidu grabs the bull by its horns and tail, immobilizing it while Gilgamesh strikes the killing blow between its shoulders. Their teamwork demonstrates how their complementary abilities, Gilgamesh's strength and leadership, Enkidu's knowledge of wild creatures and natural wisdom, make them stronger together than either could be alone. But their triumph is marred by hubris. After killing the Bull of Heaven, they cut out its heart as an offering to Shamash, the sun god who has consistently aided them. Then, in a moment of reckless pride, Enkidu tears off the bull's right thigh and hurls it at Ishtar, who is watching from the walls of Uruk, mourning the death of the celestial creature. "If I could lay my hands on you," Enkidu shouts at the goddess, "it is this I should do to you, and lash the entrails to your side." This insult to a major deity represents the height of mortal arrogance, the moment when the hero's pride overcomes their wisdom completely. Divine justice, the gods convene in council to decide the hero's fate. They cannot allow such insults to divine authority to go unpunished, but they also recognize that both heroes have served divine purposes and received divine aid in their victories. The decision they reach is typically divine in its arbitrary cruelty. One of the two friends must die as punishment for their crimes, but the choice of which one seems almost random. Enlil, the god of earth and wind, declares that Enkidu must die because he urged Gilgamesh to kill Humbaba and because he insulted Ishtar. Shamash objects, pointing out that he had commanded the heroes to kill Humbaba and that they acted with divine approval. But Enlil's will prevails, and Enkidu is condemned to death by divine decree. This divine judgment reveals one of the epic's central themes: the arbitrary nature of divine justice and the ultimate powerlessness of even the mightiest heroes when the gods decide their fate. The friendship that has been the source of both heroes' strength and moral development becomes the instrument of their destruction. The death of Enkidu. The prophetic dreams. Enkidu's death sentence comes in the form of prophetic dreams that reveal his approaching doom. These dream sequences are among the most psychologically sophisticated passages in ancient literature, using symbolic imagery to explore themes of guilt, fear, and mortality. In his first dream, Enkidu sees a dark creature with a lion's face and eagle's talons who transforms him into a bird and carries him to the underworld. This transformation symbolizes the loss of human identity that comes with death. In the underworld, all distinctions of rank, achievement, and personality dissolve into a common existence of dust and shadow. The dream's description of the underworld is one of literature's most vivid and influential depictions of the afterlife. It is a place where dust is their food and clay their meat, where former kings and priests serve water to the gods, and where all human achievements and distinctions become meaningless. This vision of death as the ultimate equalizer influences later depictions of the afterlife in Hebrew, Greek, and Christian literature. The curse and the blessing as his illness progresses, Enkidu experiences complex emotions about his transformation from wild man to civilized being. In his delirium, he curses Shamhat, the temple prostitute who seduced him and introduced him to human culture. He blames her for his current suffering, arguing that if he had remained in the wilderness with the animals, he would never have faced divine punishment. but Shamash intervenes, reminding Enkidu of all the benefits civilization has brought him. Fine food and drink, beautiful clothing, and most importantly, the friendship of Gilgamesh. "Did he not make you sit beside him on the seat of honor?" the sun god asks. "Did he not have the princes of the earth kiss your feet?" Convinced by Shamash's argument, Enkidu transforms his curse into a blessing, prophesying that Shamhat will be honored by kings and nobles, that her house will be filled with treasures, and that she will be beloved for her role in bringing him to civilization. This reversal demonstrates Enkidu's moral growth even in the face of death. He learns to appreciate the gifts of human culture and relationship, even as he suffers their consequences. The deathbed revelation, as Enkidu lies dying, he shares with Gilgamesh a vision of the underworld that profoundly shapes the king's understanding of mortality. He describes meeting Ereshkigal, queen of the dead, and seeing the fate that awaits all humans regardless of their achievements in life. "I saw the king of the dark region, Ereshkigal's consort. His head was dark, his face was like the Anzu bird. His hands were lion's paws, his fingernails were eagle's talons. He seized my hair. He overpowered me." This description emphasizes the alien and terrifying nature of death's dominion, ruled by creatures that combine human, animal, and supernatural characteristics. More disturbing than the physical description is Enkidu's account of the underworld's inhabitants. There is the house where people sit in darkness. Dust is their food and their meat is clay. They are dressed like birds with wings for clothing, and they see no light, residing in darkness. This vision of the afterlife as a place of eternal monotony and deprivation, where all human distinctions and achievements become meaningless, profoundly impacts Gilgamesh. He realizes that his own fate, despite his heroic achievements and partial divinity, will be identical to that of the humblest citizen of Uruk. The death of friendship, Enkidu's actual death, is described with remarkable emotional realism. There are no last-minute reprieve or miraculous healing, just the slow, inexorable process of a strong man weakening and dying despite all efforts to save him. Gilgamesh remains by his friend's bedside, helpless to prevent the approaching loss. The moment of death is handled with extraordinary subtlety. The epic doesn't describe Enkidu's final breath or last words, but simply states that Enkidu's fate was fulfilled. This understated approach makes the death more powerful by focusing on its finality rather than its drama. Gilgamesh's response to his friend's death is one of literature's most moving depictions of grief. He refuses to accept the reality of the loss, sitting beside Enkidu's body and speaking to him as if he were still alive. He touches his friend's heart, hoping to feel it beating, and covers his face like a bride, in a gesture that suggests both tenderness and denial. For 7 days and nights, Gilgamesh maintains his vigil beside Enkidu's corpse, refusing to allow burial until he sees a worm fall from his friend's nostril, a grotesque detail that forces him to confront the physical reality of death and decay. Only then does he accept that Enkidu is truly gone and will never return. This extended grief process reveals the depth of Gilgamesh's love for his friend and begins his transformation from a king concerned with glory and power to a man obsessed with the ultimate questions of human existence. Why do we die? Is there any way to escape mortality? What, if anything, survives death? The quest for immortality. The journey begins. Enkidu's death transforms Gilgamesh completely, shifting his focus from external conquest to internal quest. The king who once oppressed his subjects and challenged the gods for glory now becomes a wanderer seeking answers to the ultimate questions of human existence. His grief over Enkidu's death becomes a more fundamental terror of his own mortality. Shall I not die like Enkidu? Sorrow has come into my belly. I fear death. I roam over the hills. Gilgamesh's lament reveals how completely his perspective has changed. The hero who fearlessly battled monsters now trembles at the thought of his own inevitable death. His physical wandering mirrors his psychological journey from confidence to uncertainty, from heroism to humanity. Gilgamesh abandons his royal duties and begins a pilgrimage to find Utnapishtim, the survivor of the great flood who was granted immortality by the gods. This quest represents humanity's eternal search for meaning in the face of mortality, the hope that somewhere, somehow, there might be an escape from the universal sentence of death. The journey to Utnapishtim takes Gilgamesh through increasingly surreal and symbolic landscapes that represent the psychological stages of confronting mortality. He must travel to the edge of the world, pass through regions of absolute darkness, and overcome guardians who try to turn him back from his impossible quest. The Scorpion people Gilgamesh's first major obstacle comes at Mount Mashu, where the sun rises and sets guarded by creatures who are half human and half scorpion. These Scorpion people represent the threshold between the human world and the cosmic realm, beings who combine human intelligence with the alien nature of the divine. When the Scorpion man sees Gilgamesh approaching, he recognizes the hero's partially divine nature, but questions his purpose. Why have you traveled so far? Why have you journeyed here to me over rivers whose crossings are treacherous? The Guardian's questions force Gilgamesh to articulate his quest and confront the apparent futility of seeking immortality. Gilgamesh's response reveals his psychological state. For Enkidu, my friend, I have traveled and roamed many leagues over the wilderness. He died, and I have been unable to rest since. I have been roaming over the wilderness and cannot rest. Now I have seen your faces. Let me see the sun, of whom I have heard tell. Whether it be in anguish or in peace, let me speak with him. The Scorpion man's wife recognizes the futility of Gilgamesh's quest. There has never been, Gilgamesh, a mortal man who could do that. No one has crossed the mountain's inaccessible tract. For 12 leagues, it is darkness absolute. No light is there, none. But despite the hopelessness of the journey, they allow Gilgamesh to pass, perhaps recognizing that he must learn for himself the limits of mortal ambition. The journey through darkness. The passage through 12 leagues of absolute darkness represents one of literature's most powerful metaphors for the psychological journey through despair and uncertainty. For 12 hours, or perhaps 12 days or 12 years in symbolic time, Gilgamesh stumbles forward through complete blackness, unable to see behind or ahead, guided only by his desperate hope of finding answers. This journey through darkness has influenced countless later works, from Dante's descent through hell to modern stories of psychological breakdown and recovery. It represents the dark night of the soul that accompanies any serious confrontation with mortality and meaninglessness. When Gilgamesh finally emerges from the darkness, he finds himself in a magical garden where the trees bear fruit of precious stones and the ground glitters with jewels. This paradise represents the beauty and wonder that can follow periods of despair, the renewed appreciation for life that comes from confronting death honestly. But the garden's beauty cannot distract Gilgamesh from his quest. He has not traveled through the darkness to find treasure or pleasure, but to discover the secret of eternal life. The jeweled garden, for all its magnificence, cannot provide what he seeks. Siduri the tavern keeper, at the edge of the sea that surrounds the world, Gilgamesh encounters Siduri, a tavern keeper who represents practical wisdom and acceptance of human limitations. She takes one look at the wild-haired, desperate king and immediately understands his situation. "You are Gilgamesh, who killed Humbaba and slew the bull of heaven. Why are your cheeks emaciated, your expression desolate? Why is your heart so wretchedly sad, your features so haggard?" When Gilgamesh explains his quest for immortality, Siduri delivers one of the epic's most famous speeches. advocating for acceptance of mortality and enjoyment of life's simple pleasures. Gilgamesh. Why? Do you wander? The life you pursue you shall not find. When the gods created mankind, death for mankind they set aside, life in their own hands retaining. You, Gilgamesh, let full be your belly, make you merry by day and by night. Of each day make you a feast, of rejoicing day and night dance you and play. Let your garments be sparkling fresh, your head be washed, bathe yourself in water. Pay heed to the little one that holds on to your hand. Let your spouse delight in your bosom. For this is the task of mankind. This advice represents one possible response to mortality: acceptance, pleasure-seeking, and focus on immediate human relationships and experiences. It's the wisdom of carpe diem, of seizing the day because tomorrow we die. Siduri's counsel offers Gilgamesh a way to find meaning and happiness despite the inevitability of death, but Gilgamesh cannot accept this wisdom, not yet. His grief and terror drive him to continue seeking the impossible. Siduri, recognizing his determination, tells him how to find Ur-Shanabi, the ferryman who can transport him across the waters of death to reach Utnapishtim. Ur-Shanabi the ferryman, Yah. Encounter with Ur-Shanabi, the ferryman who serves Utnapishtim, provides another test of Gilgamesh's character and determination. When Gilgamesh finds Ur-Shanabi's boat, he destroys the sacred stones that enable safe passage across the waters of death, acting in the same impulsive, destructive manner that has characterized his approach to obstacles throughout the epic. This destruction forces Ur-Shanabi to find an alternative method for crossing the deadly waters. They must use long poles to punt across without ever touching the water directly. This solution requires Gilgamesh to prepare 120 poles, each to be used once and then discarded, representing the laborious, step-by-step nature of spiritual progress. The crossing itself becomes a meditation on the relationship between life and death. The waters they traverse are the waters that separate the living from the dead, and the fact that Gilgamesh can cross them while still alive represents his unique status as someone who has entered the realm of death while retaining his mortality. During the crossing, Ur-Shanabi learns Gilgamesh's story and becomes another voice counseling acceptance of mortality. But like Siduri before him, he recognizes that Gilgamesh must learn for himself the futility of seeking escape from the human condition. The flood story and ultimate wisdom. Meeting Utnapishtim. When Gilgamesh finally reaches Utnapishtim, the immortal survivor of the Great Flood, he finds not a magnificent godlike figure, but someone who looks remarkably ordinary. This appearance disappoints Gilgamesh, who expected immortality to transform its possessor into something visibly superhuman. Looking at you now, Utnapishtim, your appearance is no different from mine. There is nothing strange in your features. I thought I should find you like a hero prepared for battle, but you lie here taking your ease on your back. Tell me, how is it that you stand in the assembly of the gods and have found life everlasting? This question reveals Gilgamesh's assumption that immortality should be earned through heroic action and should result in obvious transformation. Utnapishtim's ordinary appearance challenges this assumption and suggests that immortality might not be the glorious transcendence Gilgamesh imagines. The story of the Great Flood. Utnapishtim's response is to tell the story of how he gained immortality, not through heroic achievement, but through obedience to divine warning and survival of cosmic catastrophe. His account of the Great Flood provides one of literature's most detailed and influential versions of this universal myth. The flood story within Gilgamesh predates the biblical account of Noah by over a millennium and likely influenced the development of flood narratives in Hebrew, Greek, and other traditions. But within the context of the epic, the flood story serves a specific psychological and thematic purpose. It demonstrates that Utnapishtim's immortality was granted under unique circumstances that cannot be replicated. Utnapishtim explains that Enlil, the god of earth and wind, decided to destroy humanity with a great flood, but Ea, Enki, the god of wisdom, warned one righteous man to build an ark and preserve life. The flood that followed was so devastating that even the gods were terrified by its destructive power. For 6 days and 7 nights, the flood and storm continued sweeping the land. And when the 7th day dawned, the storm from the south subsided. The sea grew calm. The flood was stilled. I looked around at the weather and all was silence. The whole of mankind was turned to clay. After the flood subsided, Utnapishtim released birds to test whether the waters had receded, exactly as Noah would do in the later biblical account. When dry land appeared, he offered sacrifices to the gods, who gathered around like flies to smell the sweet savor, a detail that emphasizes their dependence on human worship and sacrifice. Enlil initially wanted to punish Utnapishtim for surviving, the flood that was meant to destroy all humanity, but Ea convinced him to grant immortality instead. This decision was made not because of Utnapishtim's heroic qualities, but because he had already survived what was meant to be universal destruction. The impossibility of replication. The key point of Utnapishtim's story is that his immortality resulted from unique historical circumstances that cannot be repeated. There will be no second universal flood, no second chance for a mortal to survive cosmic destruction and earn divine gratitude. Utnapishtim's immortality is not a reward that others can achieve through similar actions. The assembly of the gods will not convene again for you, Utnapishtim tells Gilgamesh, nor will they raise the flood again. This statement eliminates any hope that Gilgamesh might achieve immortality through the same path that Utnapishtim followed. But Utnapishtim offers Gilgamesh a different kind of test. If he can stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights, perhaps, the gods will grant him immortality. This test seems simple compared to battling monsters or crossing the waters of death, but it proves to be the most difficult challenge Gilgamesh has faced. The test of sleeplessness. Sleep, in this context, represents humanity's fundamental limitation, the need for rest, renewal, and the temporary unconsciousness that foreshadows death. To stay awake for a week would demonstrate transcendence of basic human needs and might qualify Gilgamesh for immortal status. But Gilgamesh fails this test almost immediately. Exhausted by his long journey and the emotional stress of his quest, he falls asleep as soon as he sits down. Utnapishtim instructs his wife to bake a loaf of bread for each day that Gilgamesh sleeps, creating physical evidence of the passage of time. When Gilgamesh awakens after 7 days, he initially claims that he has just dozed for a moment. But the 7 loaves of bread, in various stages of decay and mold, provide undeniable proof of how long he has slept. The sight of the rotting bread forces him to confront his human limitations and the futility of his quest. This scene is psychologically brilliant. Gilgamesh's denial of how long he has slept mirrors his denial of mortality. Just as he cannot acknowledge that he has been unconscious for a week, he cannot accept that death is inevitable for all mortals, including himself. The plant of eternal youth, taking pity on the devastated hero, Utnapishtim, reveals one final secret. At the bottom of the sea grows a plant that can restore youth, though not grant true immortality. Its name is, "The old man becomes a young man," he explains. If a man eats that plant, he will recover his lost youth. This revelation offers Gilgamesh a last hope, not for true immortality, but for the ability to restore his youth and perhaps delay death indefinitely. It's a compromise solution that acknowledges human mortality while offering a possible escape from aging and decay. Gilgamesh dives to the bottom of the sea and retrieves the precious plant, cutting his hands on its thorns in the process. The pain and bleeding emphasize that even this partial solution to mortality comes at a cost. The plant may restore youth, but it cannot eliminate suffering or struggle. The loss of hope on his journey back to Uruk, Carrying the plant of eternal youth, Gilgamesh stops at a spring to bathe and refresh himself. While he is in the water, a snake smells the plant's fragrance, emerges from the spring, and swallows it. Immediately, the snake sheds its old skin and slithers away renewed, leaving Gilgamesh with nothing. This final loss is devastating precisely because it seems so avoidable. After surviving all the supernatural dangers of his quest, Gilgamesh loses his prize to the most ordinary of mishaps, a moment of inattention, a simple human need for cleanliness and comfort. But the loss of the plant serves an important symbolic function. The snake, by shedding its skin after eating the plant, demonstrates the natural cycle of death and renewal that governs all life. What Gilgamesh sought to achieve through supernatural means, the defeat of aging and death, already exists in nature through different forms of regeneration and continuity. Gilgamesh's response to this final loss shows his growth as a character. Instead of raging against fate or seeking someone to blame, he sits down and weeps, a fully human response to disappointment and loss. His tears represent the acceptance of mortality that he has been unable to achieve throughout his quest. The return and recognition. Homecoming with wisdom. When Gilgamesh returns to Uruk, he has failed in his quest for immortality, but succeeded in gaining something more valuable, wisdom about the human condition and acceptance of mortality. The king, who left the city as a desperate fugitive from death, returns as someone who has learned to live with the knowledge of mortality. The epic's conclusion brings Gilgamesh back to where he started. The great city of Uruk with its massive walls and impressive architecture. But his perspective on these achievements has been transformed by his journey. Where once he might have seen them as monuments to his personal glory, he now understands them as humanity's collective achievement, a form of immortality that transcends individual death. Go up on the wall of Uruk and walk around, he tells Urshanabi, who has accompanied him home. Examine its foundation, inspect its brickwork thoroughly. Is not even the core of the brick structure made of kiln-fired brick, and did not the seven sages themselves lay out its plans? This invitation to appreciate Uruk's architecture represents Gilgamesh's new understanding of immortality. Individual. Humans die, but the cities they build, the stories they tell, the knowledge they accumulate, and the love they share continue beyond their biological existence. True immortality lies not in preserving the individual body, but in contributing to the ongoing human project of civilization and culture. The meaning of heroism. Gilgamesh's transformation from a tyrant seeking personal glory to a wise king who understands his place in human history represents one of literature's first great character arcs. His heroism ultimately lies not in defeating monsters or achieving supernatural feats, but in learning to accept human limitations while working to transcend them through cultural achievement and meaningful relationships. The friendship with Enkidu, which began Gilgamesh's transformation and whose loss drove him to seek immortality, emerges as the epic's central value. The love between the two friends represents the human capacity for connection that gives meaning to mortal existence. Even though Enkidu dies, the impact of their friendship continues to shape Gilgamesh's character and understanding of life. This emphasis on relationship and love as sources of meaning in a mortal existence influences later literature and philosophy. The idea that we achieve a form of immortality through the impact we have on others, the love we give and receive, and the cultural contributions we make becomes a recurring theme in human thought about mortality and meaning. The literary legacy. Epic of Gilgamesh established many of the patterns and themes that continue to define epic literature and heroic narrative. The hero's journey structure that Joseph Campbell identified in comparative mythology, departure, initiation, and return, appears here in one of its earliest and most complete forms. Gilgamesh's quest also establishes the pattern of the hero who must lose something precious in order to gain wisdom. His failure to achieve immortality is actually his success as a character, because it teaches him, and readers, about the proper relationship between human ambition and cosmic reality. The epic's treatment of friendship as a transformative force influences later literary partnerships from Achilles and Patroclus in the Iliad to Sam and Frodo in The Lord of the Rings. The idea that we become fully human through relationship with others, and that loss of such relationships can drive us to seek meaning in the face of mortality, remains one of literature's most powerful themes. The historical impact. The rediscovery of the Epic of Gilgamesh in the 19th century revolutionized understanding of ancient literature and the development of narrative forms. Scholars recognize that sophisticated storytelling, complex characterization, and philosophical depth were not innovations of classical Greek literature, but had much earlier origins in Mesopotamian culture. The flood narrative within Gilgamesh provided crucial evidence for understanding the relationship between Mesopotamian and biblical literature, suggesting that many biblical stories had earlier versions in Sumerian and Akkadian traditions. This discovery changed scholarly and popular understanding of the Bible's historical development and its relationship to other ancient literature. More broadly, Gilgamesh demonstrated that the fundamental human concerns addressed in literature, love, death, friendship, the abuse of power, the relationship between civilization and nature, the search for meaning, have remained constant across millennia. The questions that tormented Gilgamesh continue to challenge humans today, making the epic eternally relevant despite its ancient origins. Themes and symbolism. The nature of heroism. The Epic of Gilgamesh presents a complex and evolving definition of heroism that challenges simple notions of strength and courage. Gilgamesh begins the story as a traditional hero in terms of physical prowess. He is stronger than any mortal, capable of defeating monsters and accomplishing impossible feats. But this physical heroism is initially coupled with moral failure, as evidenced by his oppression of his subjects and his disregard for others' welfare. True heroism in the epic emerges through relationship and moral development. Gilgamesh becomes genuinely heroic not when he defeats Humbaba or the Bull of Heaven, but when he learns to value friendship, to grieve authentically for loss, and to accept his human limitations while still striving to make meaningful contributions to human culture and knowledge. This transformation from physical to moral heroism influences later literary traditions and provides a template for character development that remains relevant today. The idea that true strength lies in vulnerability, that wisdom comes through suffering, and that the greatest victories are often internal rather than external becomes a recurring theme in world literature. Civilization versus nature. The relationship between civilization and nature forms one of the epic's central tensions, embodied most clearly in the contrast between Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Gilgamesh represents the achievements and corruptions of urban civilization, culture, technology, political organization, and the capacity for both great creation and great oppression. Enkidu initially represents the natural world, innocence, harmony with animals, instinctive wisdom, and freedom from the complexities and moral compromises of civilized life. But the epic does not present this as a simple opposition between good nature and corrupt civilization. Enkidu's transformation through contact with Shamhat demonstrates that civilization offers genuine benefits: culture, knowledge, meaningful relationships, and the capacity for moral growth. His seduction is simultaneously a fall from innocence and a rise to fuller humanity. Similarly, Gilgamesh's journey through wilderness landscapes during his quest for immortality shows him learning from nature while remaining fundamentally shaped by his cultural background. The resolution suggests that the ideal human existence involves both civilized achievement and natural wisdom, both cultural sophistication and respect for natural limits. The problem of mortality. Perhaps no work of literature has explored the human confrontation with mortality more thoroughly than the Epic of Gilgamesh. The epic presents mortality not just as a biological fact, but as the fundamental condition that shapes all human experience and meaning-making. Gilgamesh's terror of death drives much of the epic's action. From his initial tyranny, which can be seen as an attempt to achieve immortality through fame and power, through his quest to find Utnapishtim. But the epic ultimately suggests that the attempt to escape mortality is both futile and unnecessary. Futile because death is the universal human condition, unnecessary because meaning and a form of immortality can be found within mortal existence. The epic's treatment of mortality influenced later philosophical and religious traditions, particularly the idea that acceptance of death is necessary for authentic living. The fear of death that paralyzes Gilgamesh after Enkidu's passing represents a common human response that must be overcome through wisdom and acceptance. The value of friendship. The friendship between Gilgamesh and Enkidu represents one of literature's most profound explorations of human relationship. Their bond transforms both characters, civilizing Gilgamesh's brutal nature and introducing Enkidu to cultural richness and moral complexity. The relationship demonstrates how we become fully human through connection with others who complement and challenge our individual limitations. The depth of Gilgamesh's grief when Enkidu dies testifies to the transformative power of true friendship. His desperate quest for immortality stems not just from fear of his own death, but from inability to accept the loss of the relationship that gave meaning to his existence. This suggests that our connections with others are central to human identity and purpose. The epic's treatment of friendship influenced later literary traditions, establishing patterns of devoted companionship that appear throughout world literature. The idea that we achieve our best selves through relationship with others who bring out our hidden qualities remains one of the epic's most psychologically astute insights. Divine justice and human responsibility. The gods in Gilgamesh are neither purely benevolent nor malevolent, but represent cosmic forces that are often indifferent to human welfare. Divine justice operates according to principles that mortals cannot fully understand or control, creating a universe in which innocent people suffer and the wicked sometimes prosper. But the epic does not present this divine unpredictability as grounds for despair or moral relativism. Instead, it suggests that humans must take responsibility for creating meaning and justice within the constraints of cosmic indifference. Gilgamesh learns to focus on what he can control: his own character, his relationships, his contributions to human culture, rather than raging against the limitations imposed by divine authority. This balance between acknowledging cosmic forces beyond human control while insisting on human moral responsibility influences later literature and philosophy. The epic anticipates existentialist themes about creating meaning in an apparently meaningless universe while avoiding nihilistic conclusions, about the pointlessness of human effort. The eternal questions: what makes life worth living? The Epic of Gilgamesh ultimately argues that life's meaning emerges not from avoiding death, but from embracing what makes us most human: love, friendship, cultural creation, and the acceptance of our place in the larger human story. Siduri's advice to Gilgamesh about enjoying simple pleasures represents one answer to mortality, but the epic suggests a more complex response. True meaning comes from the intersection of personal relationship and cultural contribution. Gilgamesh finds peace not by achieving immortality, but by returning to Uruk with wisdom that makes him a better king, and by understanding that the city's walls represent a form of collective immortality that transcends individual death. This answer to life's meaning remains relevant because it acknowledges both human limitations and human potential. We cannot escape death, but we can make choices about how to live that create significance beyond our biological existence. The epic's enduring appeal lies in its honest confrontation with mortality, coupled with its affirmative vision of human possibility. How do we face the unknown? Gilgamesh's journey through increasingly surreal and dangerous landscapes represents the human confrontation with the unknown aspects of existence: death, cosmic purpose, the nature of divine authority, and the ultimate meaning of human life. His courage in facing these unknowns, even when his quest proves futile, represents a form of heroism that goes beyond physical bravery. The epic suggests that we face the unknown not by finding final answers, but by developing the character necessary to live with uncertainty while continuing to seek understanding. Gilgamesh's willingness to risk everything in pursuit of impossible knowledge demonstrates the human drive toward understanding that defines our species. But the epic also warns against the kind of prideful overreach that leads to tragedy. Gilgamesh's initial challenges to divine authority result in Enkidu's death, suggesting that wisdom involves knowing when to accept limits rather than always pushing beyond them. What survives death? Although Gilgamesh fails to achieve personal immortality, the epic suggests several forms of survival that transcend individual biological existence. Cultural achievements like the walls of Uruk outlast their builders. Stories like the epic itself preserve the memory and wisdom of past generations. The impact we have on others through love and friendship continues to shape the world after our deaths. Most significantly, the epic itself represents the kind of immortality available to humans: the preservation of wisdom, experience, and insight through narrative that speaks across centuries to readers who face similar challenges. Gilgamesh achieves immortality not through divine intervention, but through the power of story to make individual experience universal and timeless. This understanding of narrative immortality influences the entire tradition of literature that follows. Writers and readers participate in a conversation that transcends mortality, sharing insights about the human condition that connect us across time and culture. The epic demonstrates that while individuals die, the human conversation about meaning, love, loss, and hope continues. Contemporary relevance. The Epic of Gilgamesh speaks to contemporary readers with surprising directness, addressing concerns that remain central to human experience despite technological and cultural changes. In an age of global interconnection yet personal isolation, the epic's emphasis on friendship as a source of meaning and transformation resonates powerfully. In a time when environmental destruction threatens the natural world, the epic's exploration of the relationship between civilization and nature offers insights about the consequences of human overreach and the need for balance between cultural achievement and environmental responsibility. In an era when medical advances promise to extend human lifespan dramatically, the epic's meditation on mortality and the proper relationship between human ambition and natural limits provides perspective on contemporary debates about life extension and the meaning of death. Most fundamentally, in a culture that often promises technological solutions to existential problems, Gilgamesh offers the wisdom that some human limitations cannot be overcome through external means, but must be accepted and integrated into a meaningful life. The epic's honest confrontation with loss, its celebration of friendship, and its ultimate affirmation of human possibility within mortal constraints provide guidance that transcends its ancient origins. The Epic of Gilgamesh endures because it tells the first and perhaps the greatest story about what it means to be human, limited by mortality but capable of love, friendship, cultural creation, and the wisdom that comes from honestly confronting our place in the universe. In a world still grappling with the same fundamental questions that tormented and ultimately enlightened the king of Uruk, this ancient story continues to offer both comfort and challenge, reminding us that we are part of a conversation about meaning that began over 4,000 years ago and continues as long as humans exist to love, lose, and seek understanding in the face of the eternal mysteries that define our existence. The epic's final image, Gilgamesh showing Urshanabi the walls of Uruk, represents the proper response to human mortality. not the futile attempt to escape death, but the commitment to create something lasting that serves human flourishing. In building cities, forming relationships, creating art, seeking wisdom, and caring for others, we participate in the ongoing human project that gives meaning to individual existence within the larger story of our species. This is the gift of the Epic of Gilgamesh, not the promise of easy answers or supernatural salvation, but the harder and more valuable wisdom that life's meaning emerges from how we choose to live within the constraints that define human existence. In learning to accept mortality while still striving for significance, in valuing relationship over achievement, in seeking wisdom rather than mere power, we follow the path that transformed a tyrannical king into literature's first great hero and gave humanity its first great story about the courage required to be human.